Henry Walker stepped into the car dealership on a chilly afternoon. His old, worn coat and scuffed shoes, a quiet testament to the years of hard work he had endured. His aging car, which had faithfully served him for nearly 2 decades, was finally giving out. Today, he had decided it was time for something new. With a quiet yet hopeful gaze, he moved slowly among the gleaming, polished cars, his trembling hands brushing gently against the flawless surface of a sleek black sedan. Inside the dealership, the air buzzed with lively conversations among staff and sharply dressed customers. But Henry, with his simple and unassuming appearance, seemed completely invisible. He stood there for a long moment, his eyes reflecting a faint sense of confusion as he realized no one approached him to offer assistance. The fleeting glances, the subtle smirks of the staff, made him feel small and out of place in this extravagant setting. After a few minutes, Henry decided to approach a car that had caught his attention from across the room. Standing beside it, his eyes sparkled with quiet hope as he imagined himself behind the wheel, exploring new roads. But the icy indifference around him quickly shattered his brief daydream. No one came near him. No greetings. Not even a friendly glance. At the main desk, Garrett Blake, a young salesman with slicked-back hair and a smug grin, glanced up lazily as Henry approached. In a polite yet slightly hesitant tone, Henry asked, "Excuse me, I'd like to inquire about this car. Is there someone who can assist me?" Garrett barely looked up from his phone, a faint smirk tugging at the corner of his lips before he responded in a dismissive tone. "We're kind of busy right now. Maybe you can come back later." Henry's heart sank, the weight of Garrett's words pressing down on him like a silent condemnation. He nodded quietly, his eyes masking the sadness beneath, but inside, a storm of emotions churned. Turning away, he walked out, each step feeling heavier than the last. As Henry exited, a faint chuckle echoed from the staff table behind him. Garrett's voice, dripping with mockery, carried just loud enough for those nearby to hear. "Bet he's just here to window shop. What a waste of time." Those words cut through Henry like a dagger. Outside, he paused for a moment before stepping into his old car. The cold wind whipped through the air, carrying with it the sting of disappointment and the faint heat of lingering anger. Yet instead of letting the pain consume him, Henry let out a quiet sigh, his eyes now glowing with a determined fire. "Tomorrow," he whispered softly, his voice steady with resolve. "Things will be different." That evening, as the fading light of dusk blanketed the town in a quiet calm, Henry returned home. The world around him was serene, but inside, his emotions continued to churn relentlessly. He draped his worn coat over a chair and took a seat, his calloused hands trembling slightly as he lifted a warm cup of tea. Though his expression was calm, deep within him, disappointment smoldered like a small, unquenchable flame. Henry's mind replayed the events of the afternoon at the dealership. The dismissive glances, the mocking laughter, they echoed relentlessly, reminding him of the lack of respect he had endured. Yet what stung more than the words themselves was how easily people judged others based solely on their outward appearance. "Just because I don't wear a suit or polished shoes, they think I have no worth," he muttered softly, his voice heavy with a quiet, aching sorrow. After a few minutes lost in thought, Henry's eyes lit up with a fierce determination. He placed his teacup down on the table, opened a drawer, and pulled out a small notebook, the one that had been with him throughout his journey of building a career. The pages inside were not just filled with numbers and plans, but also the relentless efforts, hard-earned lessons from failures, and successes he had accumulated over the decades. Henry flipped through the pages, his hands brushing over familiar names, partners, investors, people who had trusted and stood by him. Picking up his phone, his eyes now gleaming with rare confidence, he dialed a number. "Jim, it's been a while," Henry began, his voice warm yet resolute. Over the next few hours, he made a series of calls, each conversation adding strength to the plan that was beginning to take shape in his mind. "I need your help," he said to an old friend in the financial sector. There's an investment opportunity here, and I think we can create something extraordinary. Henry wasn't just aiming to purchase the car dealership. He wanted to transform its entire culture, turning it from a place brimming with arrogance into a space where everyone, no matter how they looked, would be welcomed with respect. People shouldn't be judged by their clothes or the cars they drive, he muttered to himself, his voice low but filled with passion. That night, Henry sat at his small desk under the dim light of his lamp. The table was covered with documents, papers, and strategic maps he meticulously worked on. Every stroke of his pen carried his determination and heart, as if he was pouring his very soul into this plan. By dawn, the plan was complete. Henry sat quietly, gazing out of the window as the first rays of sunlight began to break through the gray sky. Though tired, he felt a sense of calm and hope wash over him. Tomorrow, he whispered softly but firmly, it won't just be about changing a dealership. It will be proof that kindness and respect always matter. The next morning, the sky was clear, and the gentle sunlight filtered through the streets. Henry Walker drove his old car to the dealership, but this time with a completely different mindset. Still dressed in his worn coat and scuffed shoes, Henry stepped through the glass doors like any other customer, giving no indication of what had transpired the night before. His calm demeanor remained, but now there was an unwavering confidence in his gaze. Inside, everything seemed unchanged. Garrett Blake stood near the front desk with his arms crossed, his smug expression intact as he chatted with a few colleagues. No one noticed Henry, just as before. But this time, Henry didn't stop to wait. He walked straight to the front desk, where Thomas Green, the dealership manager, stood looking busy. Thomas glanced at Henry, his eyes betraying a hint of irritation as he saw the old man return once again. "Good morning, sir. Is there something I can help you with?" Thomas's voice carried a forced politeness, thinly veiling his reluctance. Henry didn't respond immediately. Instead, he calmly reached into the pocket of his worn coat, pulled out a neatly folded stack of papers, and placed it on the desk. "I think you might want to take a look at these," Henry said, his voice steady but carrying an unmistakable firmness. Thomas frowned, his gaze darting quickly over the documents. As he read the first few lines, his expression began to shift. His brows furrowed deeply, his eyes widened, and his face grew pale. What is this?" Thomas stammered, his voice suddenly shaky. Standing tall, Henry fixed his unwavering gaze on the manager. "These are the ownership documents," he said slowly, enunciating every word. "As of this morning, I am the new owner of this dealership." The room fell eerily silent. The lively chatter of the staff from moments earlier seemed to vanish, replaced by a heavy tension that filled the air. Garrett, who had been standing nearby, immediately stopped his conversation, his eyes darting toward Henry in bewilderment. The other employees began whispering among themselves, struggling to piece together what was happening. Thomas held the stack of papers in his trembling hands, flipping through each page as if hoping he had misread them. This can't be possible," he said, his voice dry and unsteady. "You bought the dealership? Overnight?" "Exactly," Henry replied, his tone still calm, but now imbued with an air of authority that commanded attention. "I'm not here today to buy a car. I'm here to change how people are treated in this place." Thomas took a step back, his face etched with confusion and worry. Meanwhile, Garrett, who had so openly disrespected Henry just a day before, stood frozen in place. His eyes avoided Henry's gaze, and his hand gripped his coffee cup so tightly it seemed on the verge of spilling. Henry didn't stop there. He turned and walked to the center of the showroom, where every pair of eyes was now fixed on him. "I have a few words to say to all of you," he began, his voice low but commanding. No one dared to move, as the sheer force of his presence held the room in a stunned silence. "Yesterday, I came here as an ordinary customer," Henry began. "I wanted to buy a car, but what I received instead was indifference, disrespect, and even ridicule. You judged me solely based on how I looked, and I can confidently say, you were wrong." A heavy silence hung in the air. Henry's words, though calm, pierced through the hearts of the employees like sharp daggers, especially Garrett and Thomas. His gaze moved deliberately from face to face, lingering on Garrett just a moment longer, forcing the young man to lower his head in shame. "But today, I'm not here for revenge," Henry continued, his tone softening, though it lost none of its edge. "I'm here to create a place where everyone is treated with respect, no matter how they look." The atmosphere in the dealership grew tense and heavy. All eyes remained on Henry Walker, the man who had just declared himself the new owner. Standing tall in the middle of the room, Henry's slow, deliberate gaze swept across the employees, and each of them could feel the weight of what he was about to say. "This world isn't short on talented people," Henry began, his voice deliberate and powerful. "But what we need most are decent people. From this moment forward, this dealership will no longer be a place for arrogance or disrespect." Each of his words rang out like a bell, shaking the stillness of the room. Thomas, the former manager, still clutched the stack of papers in his hands, his eyes now filled with resignation. Garrett, the one who had mocked Henry, stood in the corner, desperately trying to avoid his gaze. Henry turned toward Thomas first. "Thomas," he said, his voice steady and uncompromising, "the role of a leader is to shape the culture. But what I've seen here is a toxic environment where people are judged solely by appearances. That is something I cannot accept." Thomas opened his mouth as if to protest, but the stern look in Henry's eyes silenced him. "You're fired, effective immediately," Henry declared, leaving no room for argument. The silence in the room grew even heavier. Thomas stumbled back a step, his face pale. You can't do this," he stammered. "You'll find that I can," Henry replied, his gaze steady and sharp. Henry didn't stop there. He turned to Garrett, who was staring at the floor, nervously fidgeting with his now cold coffee cup. "Garrett Blake," Henry said, his voice low but piercing, cutting through the thick air like a blade. Garrett flinched, his hands trembling as he looked up. "You have shown me precisely the kind of behavior that has no place here," Henry continued, his gaze fixed firmly on Garrett. "Instead of welcoming a customer, you chose to mock and belittle them. That behavior not only disrespected me, but also every person who walks through these doors. You're fired. Pack your things." Garrett's mouth fell open as if he wanted to say something, but no words came out. His face turned bright red with shame as he lowered his head and silently walked toward the office to gather his belongings. Henry scanned the room, his eyes meeting those of the remaining staff. "I'm not here to punish," he said, his voice now softer but still carrying undeniable authority. "I'm here to rebuild a culture based on respect, kindness, and fairness. If you cannot embrace these values, there is no place for you here. But if you're willing to change, I'll give you a chance." Henry's words sparked a faint glimmer of hope in the hearts of the remaining employees. Some bowed their heads in regret, while others looked at him with newfound admiration. Henry wasn't seeking fear. He was seeking understanding, a realization that they could do better, be better. The tension in the dealership began to lift ever so slightly after Henry Walker's decisive actions. While the atmosphere was still charged, there was now a flicker of light, a promise of better days to come. Henry looked around the room, his sharp eyes softening as they landed on a familiar face. "Laura Bennett," he called out, his deep, steady voice carrying both warmth and intention, as though he wasn't just speaking to Laura, but to everyone in the room. Laura, a young woman, stepped forward, her hands clasped tightly together as if to steady her nerves. Her eyes met Henry's, and in that moment, her heart filled with an indescribable emotion, one of hope, gratitude, and disbelief. "Yesterday," Henry continued, "while most people here ignored my presence, you did something different. You didn't directly assist me, but you greeted me with a smile. A small gesture, but one full of meaning. It showed me that not everyone here is consumed by arrogance and indifference. Laura's eyes widened, her lips trembling as if to speak, but no words came. She remembered the previous day, a fleeting moment when she had simply offered a smile to the elderly man standing in the showroom, never imagining how much it would mean. That's why, Henry continued, his voice steady yet commanding, I've decided to give you an opportunity. Starting today, Laura Bennett, you will be the new floor manager. The room suddenly buzzed with energy. Employees exchanged stunned glances, struggling to believe what they had just heard. Laura, who had only been at the dealership for 6 months, was being given a position many had dreamed of. She stood frozen, her eyes welling with tears, unable to find the right words. But I'm just a new employee, she stammered, her voice shaky but sincere. I don't think I'm qualified for this position. Henry smiled warmly, a smile filled with encouragement. Laura, I'm not looking for seniority or experience. I'm looking for people who are kind, who understand that respect is the foundation of every relationship. You've already shown me you have that. I believe in you. Laura's heart swelled with joy and gratitude. Tears rolled quietly down her cheeks as she bowed her head and whispered, Thank you, Mr. Walker. I'll do my very best. Henry nodded gently and turned to the rest of the staff. I want all of you to understand something, he said, his voice calm yet resolute. I'm not here to criticize or punish. I'm here to rebuild. And I need people like Laura. People who are willing to treat others with respect and kindness. His words swept through the room like a fresh breeze, stirring a newfound sense of hope and determination among the employees. Laura's new role was more than just a reward. It was a reminder that even the smallest acts of kindness could lead to profound change. A few weeks later, the dealership, now proudly bearing Henry Walker's name, had transformed into something entirely new. Gone were the smug expressions and indifferent attitudes. Instead, the team greeted every customer with warmth and genuine smiles. Henry had carefully chosen new employees, and those who remained had embraced the cultural shift. They worked not out of obligation, but with a sense of pride in being part of an environment built on fairness and respect. Henry often walked through the showroom, his old coat draped over his shoulders, a quiet reminder of where he came from. He didn't seek attention, instead, preferring to observe and support his team quietly. Customers came not just to buy cars, but to experience the welcoming and inclusive atmosphere that now defined the dealership. One sunny afternoon, as golden light streamed through the large showroom windows, Laura Bennett approached Henry. Her face was radiant, her eyes brimming with newfound confidence. Mr. Walker, she said softly, her voice filled with emotion. I want to thank you again, not just for this opportunity, but for everything you've done. You haven't just changed my life. You've changed the way we all see things. Henry turned to her with a warm smile. Laura, I didn't do anything extraordinary, he replied. You proved your worth yourself. The most important thing is to always treat others with respect and kindness. That's how we change the world, one small act at a time. In that moment, Laura felt a deep sense of conviction that she was not just a manager, but a bearer of the values Henry had instilled. Henry turned and walked toward the front doors. He paused for a moment, taking in the scene around him, the bustling employees assisting customers, the joyful conversations filling the showroom. This was no longer just a car dealership. It had become a symbol of change, of hope, and of the power of kindness. As he stepped outside, the sun bathed his slender but resolute frame in its warm light. An elderly customer in a worn coat entered the showroom, and a staff member immediately greeted them with enthusiasm and respect. Henry smiled faintly, a feeling of peace settling over him. For Henry Walker, success wasn't measured in cars sold or profits made. True success was seeing people treated with fairness and kindness, no matter who they were. He had not just transformed a dealership, he had changed the lives of everyone who walked through its doors. His journey didn't end with power or wealth, but with a legacy. A reminder that kindness always has the power to transform the world. Henry Walker's story isn't just about changing a car dealership. It's a powerful reminder that kindness and respect can change the world. Every small act of compassion holds the potential to create something extraordinary. So why not start today? If you found this story meaningful, don't forget to like, share it to spread the message, and subscribe to our channel for more inspiring stories. Let's build a world where kindness always comes first.